go ahead and mark it.
Oh, wow, we're ready, huh?
Yeah,
I was still reading my notes.
Do y'all need more time?
Yeah, give it like 30 seconds, 60 seconds.
Okay.
Sorry.
Mike, would you like to mark it? Perfect.
I don't know if that's good enough. It's kind of weak sauce.
You're no Ryan, I'll tell you that.
Welcome back. We're in episode 3 of our continuation of building cyber safe communities during Cybersecurity Awareness Month, the month of October. And we've got an exciting topic to talk about today. We're going to take a deep dive into phishing. So we're not talking about at the local pond with the pole, right?
No, we're using a P on this one. So
PH.
Phishing, I think, if I can spell right. Yeah, phishing.
That was not in the job description, spelling.
But I think we have some other ishing things to talk about as well.
So I've got a list.
Oh, no.
Spear phishing, smishing,
Yep.
quishing. I promise I'm not just making up words. These are real. These are real threats.
It's starting
right?
to sound that way.
It starts to sound that way.
Yeah.
So let's talk about phishing. We've all heard the word. Let's break it down, make it in its most simplistic form. What is phishing?
Well, so phishing is a way that the threat actors are trying to trick our users into taking some action. Like I've mentioned before, either clicking on a bad link, opening an attachment that's got some kind of malicious payload in it, or what's the third way? I'm having a brain fade.
Link, attachment. What they're after is our credentials mostly, right? If it takes you to a landing page and asks you to enter credentials, that's usually a red flag too.
Yeah, that's what they want, right? They want to gain
Yeah.
access to your credentials, or they want you to open that payload, which will, release some ransomware like we talked about last week. But the reason we continue to talk about phishing is it's the number one crime type according to the FBI Internet Crime Report. And there are like 30 billion emails sent every day that have phishing related links in them. So it's not like you're not going to come across these things. And most of our viewers, and I'm sure you have, received for sure the phishing emails.
For sure.
Most likely the smishing, which is SMS text version of phishing, where they send you a text saying you need to click on this in a hurry or else you won't get your package or something else will happen. Or the QR form of phishing, which we call quishing, which is where you scan a QR code, but it's taking you to a malicious link where you may be enticed to enter those credentials, and now the bad guys have your username and password.
So I pulled up my personal email this morning, and it's an email that I've used for years. We talked about it in one of the previous episodes when we talked about going to that website, I have been owned or I have been pwned.com. That's one that's had several trips around the World Wide Web, right? It's been compromised a couple of times. It's the one I continue to use, though, because everybody knows it. So I opened my email this morning, and I had one phishing email. It was a link, says, thank you for your business. Here's your invoice. It was a generic email address, nobody I'd done business with, but it had a PDF attachment. Mm-hmm. So PDFs are safe, though, right? I mean, it's
not necessarily.
Right.
Yeah. So that's the problem. And we go back to the user awareness discussions we've had in the past is you've really got to say, was I expecting this? Did I recently buy something from this firm? Most legitimate firms will readily identify themselves in the email through their logo and their ID, but that's not a guarantee. The threat actors are very quick to borrow those logos and use those identities. But if you're not sure, then pick up the phone and call and verify. Do something out of band. Don't click on the attachment and take the chance that you open it and it has some malicious payload.
Yeah, just because you see an email that comes from, say, looks like from Dropbox, has their logo, even may you have their correct return address at the bottom of the email, could be a cyber criminal, right? Especially if you're not expecting it, because guess what? Cyber criminals, it's right there in the name. They're criminals. They don't care about copyright infringement if they're using Dropbox's logo,
It's
right?
not stopping them. Yeah.
And little secret, it's one of the phishing techniques that we used at the risk pool when we work with some of our members in phishing engagements. We sent one that looked like it came from Dropbox also. So it's a good way to get people to lower their guard because, most people use Dropbox.
And most people use their email as their workflow at work. their personal life. It's the way they communicate their business transactions. So it's a common communication media that's being exploited many, many times over every day.
Yeah.
A quick anecdote is the state of Texas is doing a pretty good job. Our users in Texas generally aren't in the top 10 of states that are compromised via phishing, but we're not in the bottom 10 either. So we're somewhere in the middle. And the size of Texas, that's still a lot of people that are getting fooled into clicking into phishing emails. The other stat I want to tell you is, although we're not number one in phishing or number two or even the top 10, we are the second largest state, according to the FBI, as far as losses due to cybercrime, financial loss. So the ones that are getting through are getting paid.
Yeah. So this is one of those where state pride, we like to be number one, right? This is not one where we want to be number one. We're number two.
Yeah.
And we'll throw somebody else under the bus. California, right? It's number one.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
So we need to work on that, of course. So let's talk about phishing, but let's talk about some red flags. When you receive an email, what are some things that jump out at you that say, well, you know what? When I was a police officer, former life, we had an expression called JDLR. It means just don't look right, right? It's that sixth sense that something is wrong. This is not what I was expecting, and it just doesn't look right. So you take a second, you stop, and you think, what are some of those things when you look at an email that say that's JDLR maybe?
Yeah, so the first thing is, was I expecting this email, right? Is this someone I've communicated with before? That's not a guarantee, but it's just an indicator. What time of day did it get sent to me, right? Normally the people that are conducting business with me are in the United States, so I kind of know the time zones in the U.S. If I get this thing at 2:30 a.m., that should be a little bit of a trigger for me to look deeper, right? The other thing we talked about earlier in one of our other podcasts was the grammar and the language being used in the email. Does it read correctly? Does it sound like an English speaker would articulate these things? And then last, I would simply say that you need to just look at what they're asking. And the example you gave is a great one, because I get those every once in a while, probably once a week, where it says, I've purchased something, here's your receipt. The receipt is a PDF or some kind of an attachment, and it's enticing me to look, and it always invites me, if I have a problem, go to this link. They're trying to trick me into using that link,
right?
Because I say, I didn't buy this, whatever it was, and it's normally pretty expensive, $600, $700, $800 range, which I would call expensive. And I definitely don't want that charge on my credit card. So now they're compelling me to take action. And that's the other aspect of these emails that you really need to be aware of, is they're trying to put some sense of urgency into the message they're delivering. You need to, if you don't agree, click here, report this to us.
Yeah.
And it's never via a phone call.
No.
It's always a link.
No, they want you to land on that landing page or open that attachment that has something malicious behind it, right? So you talked about grammar. You know, the use of artificial intelligence is a big thing now that can help phishing threat actors gain better access. You know, the grammar is not necessarily a red flag like it used to be. One thing I've seen, though, also is where you're one of multiple recipients in an email. So it's an email blast. It's sent out to multiple different people. You're not the only target. Or, you know, we all use Gmail or Hotmail or some of these other accounts, but if it's something that looks like it's business in nature, meaning, an example the other day, we saw one that appeared to come from an HR department at a city, but it was from a Gmail address, right? So those are two things that they just don't link up. They don't make sense. Or JDLR, right? Just doesn't look right. So those are the things that we need to be paying close attention to.
Yeah, those are the easy signs.
Yeah.
Now, there are other signs that are a little bit more complex, but especially in the work environment, you need to take the time to look at those. Hover over the sender email.
Yeah.
It should pop up with exactly what that email is. If it pops up with a different email, you know that email address in the from field is spoofed.
Right.
It's a fake. It's just a text entry saying it came from Ryan at tmlirp.org, and it didn't. It came from somebody else at gmail.com. That's a huge red flag.
Yeah.
But you had to take an action to discover that one.
Right.
Right. And so, you know, it's getting more and more complex with the use of AI. The language is not as good a giveaway. I wish that I had some of this AI when I was in school. My English grades were not that good. But these guys must have really failed school because their grammar is usually very poor.
Yeah.
And even with the AI, sometimes the message just doesn't fit the context. Because, as you said, they're blasting this out to millions of people at a time. They don't spend the time to tailor it towards a specific message. They just try to get it out there as many times as they can, hoping that somebody will click on the link and that they'll have another victim.
Yeah, an example of that would be, I don't handle invoices or payments in my organization, but if I get an email requesting me to make a payment for something that my organization may have purchased, I mean, that's a red flag, right? That's not something I would normally handle. So why is it coming to me? So those are the kind of questions you need to be asking yourself as far as, is this really intended for me, or is this somebody trying to gain access to my information?
No, that's another great point. If I don't normally talk with the director of the organization because of my level in the organization, then that should be a red flag if I get an email directly from that person, especially if it's asking me to take some financial action.
Yes.
Right? One of the things I really love about our director is he always puts in the bottom of his messages to you and I and other employees is, if you are not sure about this message, please text me or call me directly. And that's just a great example of a leader of an organization acknowledging that you're receiving a message from him which may not be normal.
Right.
And that if you have any concerns, contact me out of band.
Yeah.
And let's verify this.
Trust but verify, right? We all hear that saying. You mentioned something about hovering over an email address, but you could take it a step further and hover over a link. So if you get a link in an email, and I've seen this one come through several times where it appears to come from your bank, Chase Bank, you've got to log back in to re-verify your information, or from Microsoft, your account's been compromised. Click here to log back in, and you hover over that Microsoft link, and it takes you to some unknown web page. It's definitely not Microsoft.com. You can always just Google the correct website or contact Microsoft or Chase Bank in this case directly to make sure you're landing on a page that is legitimate instead of the one that's in the link, because that's where the cyber criminal wants you to land.
No, you're right. And many organizations will tell you this. My bank tells me this all the time. We will never ask for your user credentials via email or over the phone. And I think that's a phenomenal message to send, because it's reassuring to the end user like me who sees this message that's creating this sense of urgency. Something's wrong with my money. That's my bank account. If something happens, I'm in bad shape. So I'm panicked a little bit.
Yeah.
But if I could remember that, hey, my bank has told me they will never ask for my login credentials over the phone or via email, this doesn't seem right. It's not right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Talking about, email from your executive director or from your city manager that you might not be expecting. We've seen multiple instances where employees have gotten emails that appear to come from the mayor or city manager asking an individual to go out and purchase gift cards. I can't imagine a legitimate reason that email would ever come through, but you'd be shocked at how many people will just see that it's from the executive director or the city manager and say, oh, I need to take action quick. And that's where they get you. It's the take action quick that typically always gets us in trouble. Stop, think, verify is always a good method to take.
And that leads us into that other type of phishing you mentioned, which we call spear phishing, right?
Yeah.
And so spear phishing is phishing in general, but they're targeting the phishing towards one particular person, usually an executive in the firm, or they're emulating an executive to target another executive in the firm, compelling them to take some financial action. And unfortunately, this works way too often as well. Some of it is the result of business email compromise, which you may recall we talked about last episode, where somebody's credentials have been compromised, either through one of these other scams or another mechanism. And now they're acting like they're the CEO, sending an email to the CFO, possibly, and saying, I need you to pay this. We're merging with another company. And it's usually 7-8 figures amounts. These are huge dollar amounts. And unfortunately, people have fallen victim to that. In government, we don't see a whole lot of that, but it's still fraudulent instructions to tell the employee to pay someone and send the money to an erroneous banking or routing number, and the loss is real.
So we've had way too many of these instances happen to our members over the years. And this one bothers me a lot, right? Because these are things that are avoidable. We've seen members lose hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in fraudulent transfer because of the scenario we just described. And I think what's so frustrating from our standpoint is we know that this is an instance that is almost as close to 100% avoidable as probably anything in life. And that's by doing one thing, taking a moment to do an out-of-band authentication, meaning, like you said earlier, pick up the phone, call, verify that you're speaking to the right person and that transfer request is legitimate. I'll take it one step further. It always needs to be a call that you initiate, right? Because you and I both know an example of something that's happened a few years ago where one of our cities tried to make a verification step. They were doing the right thing, following their policy, which is great, but they had to leave a message. And just so happens, out of sheer coincidence, the threat actor called in and said, "Hey, I'm checking on the status of this payment." And the city employee said, "I just left you a message. I was trying to call to verify." And they said, "Well, here I am. I can verify right now." But it was a phone call that was inbound versus initiated. And what that person should have done is just stop and say, "Let me call you back," and then initiate the call.
Yeah, and I think it's up to managers and other employees to set the culture in your organization that says it's okay to not pay this thing without calling or without getting that positive affirmation. It can wait. And, I think back to an earlier topic we talked about in another episode, I think most of us go into public service because we want to help our fellow citizens and we want to better our state or our city or our community. And so we're very eager to do the right thing all the time. I think the threat actors are taking advantage of that goodwill and good nature, and sometimes they're putting us in these awkward spots, which I believe, leads us as leaders to say, look, we want you to take your time. It's okay. We'd rather be sure, and we will support you if we're not able to get that paid today because you didn't reach that vendor via the phone, even if they called you back, right?
Yeah.
Because the outcomes are almost always 100% loss. It's very seldom that we hear that we were able to get the money back from a fraudulent transfer.
Yeah. It's tough.
Yeah.
And we talk about worst case scenario for the entity is the monetary loss, but think of it from the employee's perspective. I mean, worst case scenario there could be something, worse for you. You may lose your job over something like this. So it's definitely something that we need to stop and think about before we take any action. So phishing, spear phishing, smishing.
Yeah.
There's another one.
Right. It's not too far away from the first two. Smishing is when you get a SMS text message, which is why we call it smishing. We put the SMS on front. That is compelling you to go to some link or to take some action. I just got one at lunch that said, you need to log in here and do this action. And I was looking at it at first. It really worried me. But as I read the context, it was the state of Texas telling me my tags were about to expire on my travel trailer and I had 3 months to renew. Okay, that makes sense. It fits the rest of the narrative. But I'm still not going to do that on my phone.
No.
And I'll tell you why. And you and I talk about this all the time. You can't hover over the link in the phone, in my phone, and see what the real URL is.
Right.
So that adds some risk. I really want to know, is that www.texas.gov before I click on that and start entering payment information.
Right.
So in that case, I just said, I'm going to defer this. I do have a travel trailer. I do think the tags are up in December, but I don't have to solve it today at lunch, and I don't have to do it over the phone.
That's right.
So smishing messages are usually a little more convincing than that. That one I think is legitimate, but they all follow that same kind of pattern. They're going to text you, and they're going to try to create some sense of urgency that you owe them something or there's some action you need to take right now. And they can continue to send those until they actually make you really worried. Have I missed something? And I think you went through this.
Yeah, so that happened to me this weekend. My wife, and it was our anniversary, 23 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Went and spent the weekend away from the kids for once and stayed at a hotel and booked or paid for the parking at the hotel.
Right.
They have the QR codes all around, right? Of course, me being who I am, I don't scan the QR code. I go into the lobby, make arrangements to pay there, set it up in the app because you do have to do it in the app, but entered my payment information. I knew it was a legitimate landing page and paid for parking. After we left, the day after, I get a text message that says, take care of your parking pass here. Click on this link. Thought, well, that's odd. I've already paid for it. But I get 4 more over the next 2 hours. The same type of message trying to get me to click on this link to go and pay for parking. Now, was it legitimate? It's possible that it was legitimate, but what if it hadn't been? Talking about fatigue, meaning you get a message over and over and over, then you start to second guess. I know I paid for that, but did I really pay for it? Maybe I should click here to make sure, because I don't want to owe anybody money. So what did I do? I just blocked it, called the hotel, verified, and we were okay. Yeah. But I called to verify. So that's where I made sure I was safe.
And nowadays, we generally don't know the sending phone number.
Right.
For legitimate messages. A lot of times it's just a phone number, but the message is legitimate. Could be a doctor's office verifying an appointment. It could be something else in our life. And so we just accept that. So it's not like the email where we have a from that we really could look at a name and recognize. Yeah. This is just a number. And unfortunately, we're used to doing business in our regular lives with just a number. So the threat actors take advantage of that pattern in our behaviors, and they move right in. That's smishing, right?
Yes.
You went, it's older than your story about a QR code, and I'll tell you, that's quishing now, is when they make a bad QR code that they either send us or they somehow get us to scan with our phones. Mm-hmm. And again, it'll pop up with the real URL, but it's usually written so small you can't read it all. And so we click on it, we go to some URL, some website that we need to take some action. The bad guys want your credentials. They want your username and login. So they will have a legitimate looking landing page, as you said, where it's compelling you to enter your credentials so that you can get something urgent handled. QR codes really became very popular during the COVID pandemic because we weren't being handled menus, and just a lot of paper that used to change hands no longer is changing hands because we don't want to spread the virus. So people got very accustomed to using QR codes. Even if you were never a QR code user, you became one. Unfortunately, the bad guys saw that change in our pattern and behavior, and so they started creating these malformed or these illegitimate QR codes. And I want to tell you that they do all kinds of things. We talked earlier about making sure the site is legitimate. They will register domains that look legitimate.
Sure.
You may have a vendor that you do business with, ABC Incorporated, and they'll change it to abc1incorporated.com. They'll register that domain, and then they'll send you an email from Ryan at that, and you think that's the guy that's been a vendor for you for 12 years, and you make the payment. So we really have to be very diligent, especially when it comes to information that comes in our inbox or via text.
Yeah. We get so numb to the vast number of emails that we get, and we click through things quickly without thinking. So I think the key point is making sure that you just stop and think, is this legitimate? Am I expecting it? Are they asking me to take some action? Is there a financial impact at stake? Are they asking me to enter credentials? If all of those are a yes, then that's probably a phishing email, right? Yeah. So we just need to take a little more time. I love to say the JDLR expression because it means a lot to me because of my background,
I like
but it makes sense. And it's a sixth sense that you have. If it doesn't look right, it's probably not right. Or if it's too good to be true, it looks too good to be true, then it probably is. So that's kind of a...
The last thing I would add is MFA, multi-factor authentication. You need to enable that wherever it's available.
Yeah.
Because as you and I know, that one last step has saved a lot of our members from huge losses.
So clicking on something takes you to a landing page. You still enter your credentials. If MFA is enabled, then that makes you more secure.
That's right.
Doesn't excuse you from taking that action that you shouldn't have taken, but it's at least a safety net. And we'll go into a lot of detail next week, right?
That's our topic
about
for
MFA.
Next week. Yep.
So that's great. So we've gone through, this is week 3. We talked about the general overall threat landscape. We've talked about, what did we talk about in week 2?
I'm surprised you don't remember.
Ransomware.
It was ransomware.
I was testing.
Yeah.
So we talked about ransomware in week 2. We did a deep dive into phishing, no pun intended.
Yep.
About all the different phishing techniques. Next week we'll talk about multi-factor authentication, something that you and I both strongly believe in. We'll talk about the do's and don'ts and the pros and cons, very few cons, if any.
Yes.
And how we can go about implementing multi-factor. So,
Looking forward to it.
anything else?
No, I think we've done a good job today, but I'm looking forward to next week's discussion about MFA.
Sounds good.
All right.
Well, thanks for joining us on week 3. If you like what you see, please click on the like button, subscribe to our channel to be up to date on all the new material that we will be releasing over the weeks to come.
And they can also email us any
Yes.
suggestions at cybersquad@tmlirp.org.
Suggestions only, not critique, if at all possible.
And no phishing emails.
And no phishing emails. All right. Thanks all. We'll see you next week.